Bringing you the top stories from Bonners Ferry to St. Mary's and everywhere in between, this is the North Idaho Prepcast with Ryan Scaggs.
That's right. Welcome into another edition of the North Idaho Prepcast here on IdahoSports.com, your weekly source for all things District 1 athletics in the state of Idaho. I'm Brandon Bainey, joined by a guy who's got a new podcast set up here, Ryan Scaggs. What's going on?
What's going on? How you doing today?
Good. You sound magnificent.
Thank you. The dulcet tones of my voice are coming through clearly.
Right, exactly. So there's a couple of ways to get the weekly North Idaho Prepcast, right? You can get the audio only at our website, IdahoSports.com. Across the top of the navigation bar on the homepage, there's now a Prepcast section with a drop-down menu. You just click on North Idaho Prepcast, and all the episodes are right there in a player on that page. You can also download this podcast wherever you get your podcasts, except for Google. Right now, Google Podcasts, they messed something up on their back end, but we're working on it. But everywhere else, you can get the North Idaho Prepcast. So you can hear this new microphone that Ryan got for the podcast. It sounds fantastic. You can also see the new microphone and see what Ryan's wearing today by checking out the video of this podcast on our YouTube channel as well as our Facebook page. So you are repping Boise State today on the shirt. That looks good.
That's right. Well, I paid enough money to go there. I figure I might as well be a fan too.
You know what? With the cost of college and higher education, they should give you some swag for what you're paying, right? Just give it to you for free.
For sure. It should just be included, kind of like a signing bonus. Yeah.
Yeah. Funny story real quick, and then we'll actually dive into North Idaho football. So I grew up in Montana, and a kid that I went to high school with ended up playing college football at this like Division III school over in Indiana. It's called Rose-Hulman, and it's one of the best engineering schools in the country. But the other cool thing is it is where the Indianapolis Colts used to hold their training camps. They held it at Rose-Hulman because NFL teams do that a lot, right? They go to these small college campuses.
Yeah. No, my dad went to Northwest College over in Kirkland where the Seahawks had their training camp. So
yeah, right, exactly. And so he said these NFL guys would, because they're making so much money, the big time stars, they would wear these fancy gloves and wristbands and stuff. They'd wear them for like a day or two, and then they would toss them and get new gear. So my buddy and all his other football guys, they were like dumpster diving every couple days for all this swag and gear and equipment and stuff. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So you gotta do what you gotta do when you're a poor college kid, so I don't blame them.
Right. Yes. Yeah, exactly. Well, we're representing the college athletics today, Ryan, because you're wearing your Boise State shirt. I've got on my University of Montana Grizzlies shirt, and I think that is the perfect segue into what we're going to talk about today. So last week we kind of broke down the 5A and 4A Inland Empire League football teams and how we thought those might shake out. Today we're going to focus on those smaller classifications, and I think the best place to start is at the 1A level, where you've got a co-op of Idaho and Montana, Mullen and St. Regis, playing 8-man football. They did extremely well last year, and they look loaded for bear again in 2021.
Yeah, I mean, they were a solid team last year. I mean, obviously they lost to Dietrich, though. They kind of got boat raced there in the playoffs.
That happened to a lot of teams.
That happened to a lot of teams that played Dietrich last year.
Yeah.
So, if it wasn't for one or the other school, they wouldn't have a team. I mean, they wouldn't have football in Mullen or St. Regis. So the fact that they come together, I mean, no, in Montana they can play 6-man, which is kind of its own interesting thing in its own right. But the fact that they can play 8-man ball in the state of Idaho is pretty awesome. And not only do they play it pretty well. And they've got college coaches now knocking on the door. Fairly regularly out there up by 90 from me. Last year, Riley Trogdon graduated, but he's now playing, I believe, at Dickinson State. And then they've got another slew of running backs coming in behind him with Luke Trogdon and Adam Ball that, are two very good athletes in their own right. And you can throw in their quarterback too, Caleb Ball, who's also off conference. I mean, they're playing 8-man football, and they've got 5 guys coming back that were all conference. So they're, I don't want to say you don't really get much more loaded than that on a team that, 80% of your roster was all conference, but, they're going to do fairly well. And they've got a schedule that I think kind of lends itself to some success where they can keep the momentum going through the end of the year.
Yeah, I think I saw today actually on social media that Adam Ball just received an offer from Dickinson State as well. So that
Sweet. Yeah.
Mullen to
And
Dickinson.
well deserved. I mean, both those guys, it's 1A and 1B as far as, some of the top players in the state at the 1A D2 ranks.
Yeah, so you talked about the schedule. It's kind of interesting because they play basically like half the games in Mullen, and then they do go over to St. Regis, Montana, and they will play some Montana opponents like Thompson Falls and schools like that. So it is kind of an interesting mix, and that's what teams up north have to do, right? You have to go to other states
Yeah.
sometimes to fill the schedule.
Well, we'll see it definitely when you get into the IML at the 3A level. What those schedules look like, and you obviously see it with the 3A or the 4As and 5As playing the Washington schools. Sometimes you just got to fill those holes, and travel does come into it. I mean, they could probably pick up some games against some of the teams from District 2, but I mean they've got. I think that they are playing to the St. Regis side of things by playing Thompson Falls and Charlo. They do have to play their conference schedule twice. So both teams in conference, they've got to play a home and away game. So they're obviously Mullins picked to win their conference this year, picked to win the North Star. They won it last year. They were 8-2. I mean, really, you look at the schedule, they could go undefeated. I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility. They could go undefeated into the postseason. They've got very high hopes. Coach Spooner does with this crew, but they open with Thompson Falls, and then they play Lakeside Wallace, and then they play Clark Fork. They've got them kind of with a bookend game with Kootenai in between. Kootenai playing football again, which is great. I mean, last year they had to forfeit a couple games with COVID, but and then didn't even have a team the year before. So the fact that they're coming back into the league, hopefully, I mean, it helps, kind of balance one schedule for other teams, but two, in the competition level, getting some of those games back in there. You never know what happens with Idaho small school 8-man football, who gets sawed on a Friday afternoon, Friday night, and puts up, some fireworks on the scoreboard. So it should be Mullen, around here for 8-man football is the cream of the crop as it comes to North Idaho this year, I think. You get in District 2, I'm sure there's a couple teams down there that would say otherwise. But I mean, that's the nice nature about it too. I think that the way things get bracketed this year too, they're on opposite sides. So the Northern Idaho teams, from District 1 and District 2, I believe are separated this year, which would be pretty nice that you could see them in the finals, which would be pretty outstanding.
Yes.
If it gets that far.
Right. So last week
Yeah.
we do the Idaho 8-man Prepcast where we talk about just 8-man football in those 1A schools. Paul Kingsbury and I do that every week. And Paul came out and said that he thinks he likes Kendrick as his state champion.
Dude,
in 1A D2.
Kendrick's legit. Yeah.
Yeah. Could
They
you
got
imagine
they got some
Kendrick?
horses down there.
Yeah. Could you imagine Kendrick matching up with Mullen, St. Regis for the title?
In the Kiwi Dome. Yeah, in the
Oh.
Kiwi Dome. That would be fantastic. That would be awesome. Yeah, that would be for Northern Idaho football would be fantastic. That'd be super cool to see. I know that there's some great teams down in Southern Idaho too. Dietrich being one of them last year was, pretty darn good. Let's be honest. But I mean, things change year to year too. You get graduation can hit the smaller schools harder, I think, than bigger schools. Just because if you lose one or two of your great players, I mean, it drops off pretty quick from there. It's just a numbers game. So, the competitive balance, I think, sways a little bit harder in 8-man football than it does in 11-man. Just because of getting athletes on the field, you don't have necessarily the numbers. But it's I believe a fairly balanced attack for Mullen, which is you've got two running backs. You can't key on one kid. They've got an all-conference tight end, so they can throw it around a little bit too. So it should be a good year for Mullen. I definitely would put them in the favorite category to make a very deep run in state this year.
Yeah, I totally agree. And just real quick, I want to give Kootenai a shout out. You mentioned they've had some down years where they haven't even had enough players to field a team. I really see a turnaround in their athletic department. Nolan Kirby is the new athletic director at Kootenai this year, and Jake Pfeiffer is going to be the football coach. And I think he's got a good vision of what Kootenai athletics can be. So it's pretty exciting.
No, yeah, and like we talked about with the movement of the influx of population in North Idaho. I mean, the rising tide lifts all boats. And not only is Coeur d'Alene and Post Falls growing, but all the smaller communities are picking up people too here and there. I mean, it may not be the numbers where you're seeing the thousands like you see in Kootenai County, but there's still an influx in population going to Plummer and some of these smaller communities too. So I mean, yeah, they're doing a great job and doing, I think, what's necessary to grow, um, you know, grow athletics and activities in their respective schools. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So speaking of Plummer, let's kick it on up a notch and go to the 1A
Yeah,
D1 level. That's where Lakeside and Wallace reside. What do you see in terms of football there?
Obviously they play each other twice. They kind of play mirrored schedule for the most part. The main difference, obviously, I want to say is like Wallace is picking up a game against Clearwater Valley's JV team, I believe, instead of playing their varsity. It may be a mix of varsity and JV. And the Lakeside opens with Lewis County right off the bat, and then have Deary too on the schedule, which Deary's usually had a fairly solid program as well. And they play Kendrick. That's the real test. I think third to the last game of the year that Lakeside's playing Kendrick. If you want to see how Lakeside is, I think that's a good litmus test of, if Lakeside's going to be legit. They made the playoffs last year. They were the league champ, going 4-3 in 2020, but they lost to Oakley and lost big. If they can get, I don't like comparing sports, but sometimes you have to with, seeing in small schools, especially a lot of those kids are going to come back out and play. I had the 1A D1 state basketball tournament that I got to broadcast that here on Idaho Sports and got to see all these teams play. If they can get some of the athletes that they've got on the bench, from Lakeside, if they can get a couple of those kids to come out and play football, they've got some dudes. Lakeside can play. They're athletic. So, I mean, they've got a couple of decent sized kids too that I could see making a difference on the gridiron if they can come out and play, which hopefully that's the case. And, if that is, I'd see them repeating as league champs again. Wallace is kind of the unknown because you don't get a ton of information on them, which is difficult. I mean, you can go back and try to search like max preps and other things. I mean, really, you can just find that, they were 2-5 last year with their victories coming against, I believe it was Clark Fork and Kootenai. So, it was I don't want to say the cupboard was bare last year for them. So they could be on the upswing too. It's kind of an unknown conference because of it's only a 2-team league that does kind of split their schedule with the 1A D2 ranks. I'd love to see them maybe pick up a few more games against some of the District 2 teams. I know that they used to kind of play that split schedule, back with the old White Pine League days, where they'd kind of mix and match, and it made for more competitive balance. But I know that now that we use the max preps rankings, obviously, they don't necessarily have to do it. You just got to try to get a winning record, and you're pretty much getting your entry to state.
Yeah, there's two schools of thought with that. There is the try and just take care of your wins by scheduling easy competition. Yep. But then by the opposite, there are ways that you can schedule tough competition. And as long as they continue winning, that will also boost up your profile. For example, I know like Grangeville is playing Moscow this year, right? They're playing a really tough schedule. They've
played each other fairly often the last few years too.
Yeah, they're playing Weiser this year, which people think are going to go pretty far in the 3A. And so the idea there is pretty
solid, yeah.
Yeah, and but on the flip side of that, Weiser and Moscow are probably, favored as quote unquote bigger schools in that matchup, and they could get a nice win. And then Grangeville, they know, is going to continue to win at the 2A level, which is only going to boost their profile. So it's kind of interesting with the ratings and how teams go about the schedule. But
yeah, and you throw in like Clark Fork that last year they went 2-3. They play opening with the Montana school. Obviously, they're right there along the Montana border. I mean, if you could be at the football field and you got any sort of arm, you can haul back and pretty much hit the state of Montana with a rock. But they're playing the back. It's kind of an interesting schedule because they play, Troy of Montana, then Wallace, then Lakeside, and then it's Mullen back-to-back weeks and Kootenai back-to-back weeks. I mean, they're playing their league opponents towards the front end of their schedule, and then playing the smaller D2 schools on the backside, which to me didn't make a ton of sense. But I'm obviously not an athletic director. But it's kind of do or die. Hopefully, they're hoping to catch Wallace and Lakeside early in the year, maybe not as polished, and that might give them an outside chance of getting that league berth, depending on what happens in the back end of the year. But really, I want to say the favorite in that conference is obviously Lakeside, just based off of what we saw last year from them, and what they've got coming back.
Yeah, I think there's lots of untapped potential there, and it's just a matter of seeing that potential be realized. So, we kind of talked about Grangeville, right? Yeah, we kind of talked about Grangeville. Let's transition into the Central Idaho League, the 2A ranks. It's another small conference, as most of them are up north. Grangeville, Orofino, St. Mary's. I think Grangeville the favorite, but then between Orofino and St. Mary's, I think it could go either way.
Yeah, and I'd like to say that conference really has probably the coolest settings of football stadiums in the state of Idaho. Between those three teams, they're pretty outstanding. I mean, it really does get the aesthetics of football in North Idaho is pretty awesome. But yeah, I mean, you talk about St. Mary's. Obviously, they were a team last year. They lost, some of their big starters. Four big time players for them graduated. But really, the thing that we didn't see about St. Mary's last year is they had a month off because of COVID, and they didn't play a game for a solid month. So you really didn't get to see a lot out of them. And then when they did come back, they were so limited on numbers, even in their last two games, that, I mean, they lost to Grangeville. I think it was 21-6, and still, 6 guys were out. So, it was kind of a crapshoot. And Coach Teff does a great job with his program. And they last won their state title, I believe it was 2016. That pedigree is still there. They've still got players. I mean, you had them in the basketball tournament, and we'll talk about our good friend Colby Renner. But him and the crew coming back. I mean, Kyle Seibert's coming back. They've got some great players on their team. They could make some noise. I mean, really, it is a one guaranteed bid. But now with those new Max Preps rankings and St. Mary's, the way that they loaded their schedule, I mean, they could very easily make it to state just based off of, even if they lose to Grangeville, just based on the competition level that they've played.
Yeah, it was really weird last year at the 2A level because you talked about Grangeville, St. Mary's, and Orofino. All three were impacted by not having a full schedule of games. There was, I think there was an actual COVID outbreak among the Grangeville football team, and that really affected the schedules. So what happened last year is a lot of those at-large bids went to the schools in like East Idaho that were able to play a full schedule. You had District 5. I think all 5 teams made the playoffs: Aberdeen, Bear Lake, Soda Springs, West Side, and I'm drawing a blank on the last team, but all five teams made the playoffs last year. But that won't happen again because those schools up north will be able to play a full schedule. And I agree with you. I think St. Mary's could easily get an at-large bid.
Oh, absolutely. What they've got coming back. I mean, they're let's be honest, for smaller schools in Idaho, like, they're pretty loaded at the skill position with who they've got coming back, and they're going to be okay at quarterback with Sean Elliott, who's a senior. They've got Sean Hunter, who's a young running back coming in that they've got high hopes on. They still have Dylan Larson. Kyle Seibert, obviously we talked about, who's all Central Idaho League defensive and offensive line. On the O line, they return, I believe it's 4 starters up front. So they've got experience up front. I think that if they can, kind of impose will at the running game, it's going to open things up because they've got Tristan Gentry and Jared Badgett there in the wide receiver that are 2 of the better wide receivers in the 2A ranks. So St. Mary's really could be kind of the dark horse in 2A, because if we look at Grangeville as being a favorite, St. Mary's, who depends on who they draw. If they get to the playoffs and who they draw in those other rounds, they could make some noise in the playoffs for sure. And they've got an interesting schedule, obviously opening with Kellogg. They've got a couple Washington schools in Lakeside and Freeman, who I kind of know this area pretty well. Very solid Northeast A teams in Washington. Historically are very good. Lakeside is a very good team. They have one of the better quarterback recruits in the Northwest. And that's any classification. They've got a QB that is legit. Freeman's always a solid program. They've got Lakeland in their 4th game. playing a 4A team. So that should be really interesting to see the competitive balance there. Then the following week, they followed up with Timberlake and Bonners Ferry. So they're playing some 3A schools there. Then they close it up with Grangeville and then at Orfino. So a pretty heavy schedule. If they can stay healthy, you know, they're playing the top 2 3A teams in the IML between Timberlake and Bonners Ferry. They're playing one of the better 4A teams in Lakeland, and then they're playing some very quality teams out of Washington. So, you know, they're going to be battle tested. I mean, if they stay healthy, I will put them up against anybody. If they can run through that schedule, maybe at 500, maybe better, they're going to be a really tough out.
Yeah, and they get to host Grangeville as well in that conference game, so that'll be a big boost.
Yeah, that's right.
For the Lumberjacks. Yeah. Well, yeah. All right. So let's talk about the IML, the Intermountain League. It's going to be Timberlake is, you know, they've kind of had a stranglehold on it the past couple of seasons, but beyond that, I see it being pretty balanced. You know, I feel like between Kellogg and Bonners, you could flip a coin there. And Priest River, I think they've got some good kids coming through. We did those Idaho All-State games earlier this summer. You know, the best 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade players. There was a lot of kids from Priest River there, so I think that might be an area that's building back up as well.
Man, they've only got room to go up. Let's be honest. I mean, with Priest River, we'll start with them. You know, but Coach Hughes is trying. I mean, like let's be honest that, you know, it's really hard to go in any level of high school football to where you're only starting 2 upperclassmen. I mean, you're not going to win a lot of games. And, you know, they've had 0 wins in the last 3 years, but they just haven't had numbers of juniors and seniors sticking around. And, you know, so they started 4 freshmen last year on the offensive line. You're not going to win a lot of games doing that. But they're all back. That's the thing. They're all back. They're all a year older. They're all stronger. They've all been hitting the weight room. So there's some high hopes. They've got 14 returning starters. They've got a solid player, Naden Thompson, that they've got high hopes on coming in. They've got a first-team player, Cam Selesky, and also a second-teamer in Matthias McLean, who's coming in. So they've gotten a year older, got a chance to really kind of settle down in this offense. You know, I would hope that, you know, they finally get the win this year. I would really love to see that finally they break through. And winning does a lot for young kids, especially, I mean, they're still fairly young this year. I believe they've only got a handful, like couple, 2 or 3 seniors on the roster for this year, but a lot of juniors and a lot of sophomores that have varsity experience. So, you know, for years to come, they hopefully will be pretty solid, but they've got a decent schedule in front of them. They're going to open with Medical Lake, which is a Washington school. Then they're at Newport, which is only 7 miles down the road. They get to host a handful of games this year with Oroville. Manson is going to be actually at Whitworth and Spokane. They play at Orfino at home. They're at Timberlake, then Bonners, and then Kellogg at the end of the year. I would hope to see them get a couple wins this year. I really would. With what they've gone through and been through as a team, you know, those kids deserve it for continually taking their lumps. I mean, they were last in scoring in the state of Idaho last year. They were last in yards given up. So they've only got room for improvement. But with varsity experience, I think that there's going to be some of that hidden kind of confidence coming back in. It's like, yeah, we've been through this before. It only gets better. You know, we're only going to get bigger. We're only going to get stronger. So hopefully Priest River can really turn things around, because if they do, I mean, for 4 teams there, it's a fairly deep conference. Like you said, there's Timberlake and everybody else, but I think that competitive balance from the bottom up is starting to rise, especially with what we've seen Kellogg do in the last few years.
Yeah, so let's talk about Kellogg. They pretty consistently get to the playoffs. They can't get over that hurdle and get a win in the playoffs, but they're always there, and they've got some really good players coming back.
Yeah, they've got some dudes, and they had the returning offensive player of the year in Riley Luna coming back. He's only a junior. I've seen him at camps. He's the real deal. He's legit, and solid player. They've got KJ Walker and Colby Luna coming in as wide receivers, as well as Jace Garcia at running back. They did lose, obviously, Aaron Leto, who's a running back, and offensive lineman Carson Hudson. But they were 3-4 last year with a fairly young roster. They could be pretty darn sneaky good this year. And, you know, I'll give Coach Davidian, he's does a great job at, balancing with what he's got. He looks at his roster and kind of says like, all right, here's what we're going to do with the team that we're given. And they run a spread offense that I know the offense that they run, because it was the same one that I did in Pullman. They had a coach by the name of Dan Lucier that was there before this new coach. But they took that same offense, and it's like a spread kind of wing T type attack and if you watch a lot of college football, it would mirror kind of what Auburn was under Gus Malzahn. And they try to get angles and get their athletes out in space, and they do a great job of it. Well, they've got skill players that I think that if they can get the ball in their hands, they pretty much would put their guy against anybody that they face. So, their schedule, obviously, the opening with St. Mary's. They've got Corvallis, Montana, then Orfino, then they're playing a home game against Sandpoint's JV team. Then once again, they're playing Grangeville, like everybody at the 3A level seems to be playing this year is Grangeville. Then they're at Bonners Ferry, at Timberlake, and then they close up the year with Priest River. They were 3-4 last year. I expect a better record out of them this year. I really do, with what they've got back at the skill position. They seem to be pretty high on their offensive line too. If they can get things moving on offense, defensively, they're going to be I think they'll do fairly well against the pass. They were last year. If they can be bend, don't break against the run, I think that they're going to outscore their opponents just by sheer, offensive possessions. So Kellogg could be kind of one of those sneaky teams in the IML this year. I don't think people are going to overlook them by any chance, but they're definitely on their way up with what they've got, and they're pretty high on this freshman class too. So we'll see what they do this year in 2021.
Yeah, that game at Bonners Ferry could determine the second playoff bid from the IML. But Bonners Ferry, they're an intriguing team. I think they've got a lot of buzz around them. It'll be interesting to see how they do.
Yeah, I mean, they've got the defensive player of the year coming back with in Wilson Newell. 8 all-conference players are coming back, and all but 3 of them are returning starters. So, I mean, everybody you don't get that much in any level, but you get that many guys back, you've got to have high hopes, and you rightfully should. Coach Hinthorn does a great job. His kids play hard, and they went 3-4 last year. Everybody in that conference just beat up on each other. It was, just everybody was bringing bricks every week and chucking them at each other, seeing who can survive at the end of the year. And, that's IML football, though. I mean, you might get bad weather. You might get, sweltering heat and a track meet. So it kind of depends on how it shows up. Offensively, if they can score, I like their chances just based on how other teams, they say that they like to run multiple offense. So, they're not going to be any one dimensional, which I think helps them a little bit. Cause we'll talk about Timberlake in a second, cause they're really good at doing one thing. Bonners Ferry, if they can move the ball, they're going to be in every ball game. They're going to open with Lincoln County from Montana. So they're making that trip over there, which I believe is in Libby. And then they're going to play Grangeville, or sorry, not Libby, but
it's in Eureka.
Anyway, Eureka. That's right. Yeah.
Yep.
So they're playing in Eureka. Then they've got Grangeville at home week 2. Then they're at Libby. Then at Orfino, they're playing St. Mary's, Kellogg, Priest River. And then the end of the year, this is going to be a pretty solid game. That last week, when I think every conference up here in North Idaho is going to be a pretty awesome game. They're playing Timberlake, and they're hosting Timberlake this year for that league champ. I think it could come down to league championship that last game in the IML. So really, realistically, if Kellogg, Bonners Ferry, and Timberlake do what they should do, I mean, I think they get 2 bids for sure. There's an outside chance at 3, just based on how they scheduled. But, anything can happen any given Friday night. So, I don't want to like pin my ears back and say, yeah, put a stamp on it that Bonners Ferry is going to finish runner up. They could come in and have a hot game end of the year and surprise Timberlake and win the championship too. I mean, it's really not out of the question, but I know what team you want to talk about next.
Well, you're right. I do think, just looking at a bird's eye view of the 3A this year, I think there are a couple of conferences where teams like in the 3A in District 3, I think those teams will all kind of beat up on each other. Homedale and
We've got like
Weiser.
Fruitland, Homedale,
Yeah,
Weiser, like they're all solid. Yeah.
they might all beat up on each other, and that might cost them a spot where the IML might be able to steal another bid. But 2 for sure, 3 maybe, but it's some things got to break their way. But
It would be reached. Some things would have to happen. Yeah, other word, but yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk about Timberlake. They have been the toast of the IML for some time now. What makes them so good every year?
It's like you try to put a finger on it. Like, and I just say this because I coached against them every year and I hated playing them because they found their niche and they're so good at it and they exploit it. And they run a wing T offense. And it's, they're going to run the ball 45 times in a game, but you also have to worry about the 8 times that they pass because they may go 7 for 8 for 200 yards. and that's what'll get you. But the one thing about it is its consistency, and they've always they kind of kept the same staff. Obviously, Kelly Amos is the head coach. Last year was his first year after Coach Albertson, finally retired. But Amos has been on that staff for a long time too. So it was kind of just like, hey, we're just going to keep this thing moving and keep going forward with what we've been doing. They did lose 5 all-conference players, and they lost in the quarterfinals last year to Homedale. But they return 11 starters and 5 all-conference players on offense, and they run the ball incredibly well. They've got 4 solid running backs that they will use all over the field. They'll put them in the backfield. They'll put them at tight end. They'll put them in a slot position. They'll even hide them at quarterback sometimes, and they'll kind of run them a wildcat with in a wing T look that's stupid hard to defend because they'll run right at your defensive end and basically say, pick one, you've got to tackle him, but the other guy's going to go ahead and run for 15 yards. They went 4-4 last year. Obviously, 4-4 is kind of a deceptive mark for them because they did play some 4A schools in Lakeland and Moscow. I think that Moscow game took place. I know that it was on the schedule. I'm trying to think back now if that was the one that actually Moscow was their first game back. But I know that they played each other in 2019 too. This year, it's kind of an interesting schedule because they're going to open at South Fremont, which if you haven't traveled the state of Idaho, that is a jaunt. That is a pretty hefty drive for them. They're going to play a 3A school from Spokane and Shadle Park in week 2, playing host to them. Then they're going to have Moscow in Moscow. They play Connell, which is a notoriously solid 1A team in the state of Washington. St. Mary's, then they're at Lakeland. Then they host Priest River and Kellogg, and then obviously they close at Bonners Ferry. But Timberlake is just, a solid program top to bottom. They get great kids. The kids have bought into what they do, and they just try to do it very well. They're efficient. They don't make a lot of mistakes. If you're going to stop them at their game, it's going to be, they're going to try to run it and basically play you in a 7-yard box, for 4 quarters and just be like, what we're going to do, stop it, and it gets incredibly hard because it becomes a battle of attrition and your mind starts playing tricks on you that now, like, okay, they've ran sweep, 6 times in a row. They come with backside counter, and then now they're throwing, a 35-yard fade down the sideline to a tall wide receiver, and they're going to, hit one big for a touchdown. So they've got some dudes on their team that, they got a deep stable. And I'll just be honest, like, you can't pick any one kid that's going to be like, hey, this guy, we got to stop him. He's going to beat us, because they've got 3 others out there this year that can do the same. I mean, they could make some noise in the 3A ranks. I don't know if I would put them as a favorite to win it by any stretch, just because Weiser is so good this year. Homedale's always solid too. I mean, Fruitland's really good. You've got the teams over in the Snake River Plain that are great. So it would be, will they be competitive? Absolutely. Yeah, I would definitely say that. I don't know if they're going to win it all, but I certainly wouldn't tell that to Coach Amos's face either, because I think that, this could hopefully be some locker room motivation for him with me selling him short. But yeah, definitely, I think they'll have a solid year. They've got a schedule that lends itself for success, that will test them early, but it's yet to be seen one of these 3A teams in North Idaho break through and really make a deep run in the playoffs too.
Yeah, they'll be right there. I mean, they'll if they were playing in the Final Four of the 3A, that wouldn't shock me at all at Timberlake. So,
Sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
you mentioned Coach Amos. He was the head coach. He was the first head coach in school history, and then now he's back in his second stint. They're like the Pittsburgh Steelers. They've had like 4 head coaches in school history. It's
Yeah.
incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, and it's one of those areas too that, we keep seeing them. You're seeing like these athletes start coming in, and Spirit Lake and Athol, that area in northern Kootenai County, has been kind of the offshoot recipient of a lot of incoming people moving in, just because it's so dang hard to move into Coeur d'Alene right now that it's like, oh, well, we can go move out to Athol, and boom. I mean, that place is blown up. If you haven't driven through there, you wouldn't recognize it from 3 years ago. And so yeah, they're the recipient, I think, of. They've got some kids that are on their roster that were not in their youth junior tackle program, but have come in and definitely contributed. And it's going to pay benefits for them the longer this goes on, because I really do see them on the cusp of being a powerhouse in 3A. They're right there.
Yeah, I think there's going to be some really good teams from North Idaho this year that won't get the acclaim and the recognition they deserve statewide. But that's why we have this. This is why we have the North Idaho Prepcast every single week. We're talking about it. We're giving those teams the spotlight because there are a lot of good teams up there, and I think it's going to be fun to chart everyone's progress throughout the season. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, it's going to be excellent. The competitive balance up here is as good as it is in the state. I just don't think there's the numbers that you see, obviously, like in the Boise and Pocatello and Idaho Falls area, as far as numbers of schools. But you've got, I mean, your top couple programs at every classification, or I would put them with the top 2 anywhere else in the state too. So it's the balance is there. It's just you don't have the numbers. You're not going to have 5 must-see games a week, but you're certainly going to get some good matchups week in and week out, and that's what we can hope for up here.
Yeah, that'll be a good time for sure. So yeah, next week we will really start diving into everything. There's a handful of soccer games that'll take place this weekend. We can kind of recap those, and volleyball will be starting up. I know Lakeland's going to be awesome again, and they've put together a very tough schedule for volleyball, and then we'll start previewing some of the football games that are coming up as well. I do want to mention real quick, there's only 3 football games going on in the entire state here in this opening weekend, 0 week. One of them is one of the first games of the year. Lakeland is going to travel to play Preston. They're going to meet in the middle at Montana Tech University in Butte. I think that's going to be a fun game and a good chance to see how Lakeland does out of the gate for football.
Yeah, and I think that actually gave them the opening door to start a few days earlier than everybody else in the state too, which, Lakeland, I know, last year kind of had a sour taste in their mouth after their playoff loss. I know a lot of those kids. I know the coaching staff. That's going to be a fun game. I can tell you that Lakeland will be a fun team to watch this year, just based on what they've got back, and everybody's a year older. And you've got Devin Suko at quarterback, that he's got another year under his belt. He's a stud athlete, and I think that he kind of goes under the radar up here because of, you've got the kids at Post Falls and Coeur d'Alene. They get so much notoriety. Devin could have himself a pretty dang good year if he stays healthy. It's, I'm excited to see what happens in that game and listen. And hopefully, I think you've got the call on that one. I hope is that what's going on?
So we tried to, but we never heard back or anything. So we're not going to be doing anything with that. But we'll certainly be here to recap it next week. All right.
Yeah, no, and I'll see if I can mosey over on Sunday or Monday and talk to Tim and the crew and kind of get a recap on what happened and everything about that game, because I'm excited to see how that turns out, because Lakeland could be a sneaky good team this year.
Yeah, it'll be fun for sure. So we'll talk about all that and more next week. But for now, thank you for tuning in to this week's edition of the North Idaho Prepcast on IdahoSports.com. For Ryan Scaggs, I'm Brandon Baney. Enjoy the opening weekend of high school athletics, everybody. We'll see you back here next week.